Hey everybody, welcome back to Will Builds. This third project focuses on building a clock in Solidworks and then using Keyshot to do a simple animation. A good intro project if you know Solidworks and are trying to get used to doing animations in Keyshot. So, let's see. Today we have a couple things that I want to try and do. This is actually part 2 of this third project. In the first project, we really focused on, and I guess we can go to a different camera here, on building a clock in SolidWorks. And today, we're going to make a few adjustments to our model in SolidWorks. Since we have it set up with a master sketch, those adjustments should be easy. And then I'm going to walk you guys through how I'm going to approach applying the numbers to my clock in Keyshot and doing a quick animation of this clock in Keyshot too. So first things first, we're going to, I actually took apart this clock, and there are a couple screws on the back of the clock that let me take this, like the glass piece, the bezel off, so I'm just going to set that down. All of these hands, and this is similar to a lot of clocks, they actually just pop off. I had to use a little pair of pliers to gently pop these off without bending the hands. So I'm going to set those aside too. All these hands kind of come off. And there was a little hex screw down here that actually held the clock mechanism to the hands through this entire frame here. So I unscrewed that actually just by hand. Took off the washer, took off the nut, and I could lift this entire thing off, and you can see on the back here, that's the actual clock motion. Oh, and important, I took the battery out of that before I started messing around, just so I didn't have to fight hands that were moving. Alright, so I'm going to set this down too, and first thing I'm going to do is go back into my SolidWorks model probably, and so let's go find that. We'll build clock animation. Here's my SolidWorks part. It's fine. I don't know what changed there. I'm going to open this back up and grab a few key dimensions that maybe I missed when I was just sort of estimating without taking this thing apart during my first build, and that was sort of the video before this. And if it's close enough, I mean, this is looking pretty close to me. The one part that I kind of missed was inside this glass part. There's another piece of plastic that kind of held the metallic bezel to the glass and held everything in place. So I might build that really quickly because you do see sort of the inside of that in the rendering. I guess we will see that in the rendering. So I'm going to go back to my master sketch, which I had set up on the right plane, square up to it, and yeah, it sort of fills in the gap between the clock face and where the glass is. So I'm going to just add an extra line here. And again, because this is purely aesthetic, I'm just going to set this up in a way that I can build a quick part in my revolve. Sure, it's like a millimeter thick. Not that important for this aesthetic model, but what is important is I'm going to go back. I'm going to actually roll all the way back to when I was building my revolve features. Sketch in the right plane again. Convert a bunch of lines from my master sketch to build this extra plastic piece that I discovered once I tore this thing apart. Make a revolve feature. I should be able to pick, I've been converting this line, I should be able to pick this line from the master sketch. You can see where that part's going to revolve around. I don't want to merge the results. I'm going to just say OK, and it puts it in place. There we go. Okay. Alright, so there are a couple things I want to do. Let me just drop this in here. Aesthetically, to make sure this clock is ready for me to bring it into Keyshot, these are also things that I sort of noticed on the real clock as I took it apart. I will add a couple more just aesthetic fillets, but a big one that I think is going to make a big difference in Keyshot is I noticed that the wood grain, let me switch cameras here to my desk capture. Okay, so you'll notice on the outside of this frame, the wood grain kind of changes as you work your way around the edge. And that's because there are a couple joints. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus on that. A couple joints between different sections of wood. And I'm going to try and make that, I forget what kind of joint that is, a biscuit joint maybe. I'm going to try and make that cut in my model so that when I import these different parts into Keyshot, I can apply my wood grain texture to each part with a different mapping. So let's go back to display, and I'm going to have to set up a plane really quick. So let's see. I'm actually going to use a top plane as a reference to create a new reference plane, and I'm going to make it at a 45-degree angle from my top plane. I don't really need a second reference, although I feel like it didn't quite do that. My second reference is the angle, like an axis that I want this angle to be at. Okay, so see, I'm like setting up a plane that's 45 degrees different. Okay, I'm going to sketch on this plane, and I'm actually going to build in this like biscuit joint, I think that's what it's called, onto my wooden part. So it looks like from the front it kind of dives in most of the way down the arc. It jumps over, dives down, to here, cuts back over, does two of these kind of things. Before it goes back to center and then all the way out the other side. Okay, again, I like to sketch this stuff in rough first, then I can do some dimensioning based on some measurements. So I'm going to turn on my calipers. It looks like that whole joint is about 9 millimeters wide. So from the center, that means it should be about 4.5 millimeters. From here to here, same. I'm going to make sure that these lines are collinear. I'm going to just add a quick relation there. Make these collinear. Alright, I am drawing, I kind of rotated here. I want to make sure that this flat line is even. Oops, let's see if I can pick that line instead of the surface. It's kind of tricky. There we go. Shoot. Try again. I'm trying to make this line coincident with this edge right here. Come on. Yeah, there we go. Man, maybe it doesn't want to let me do that. You know what? I'll make it close. I'll make it coincident with this point here instead, and we'll just see how it looks. Alright, so it looks to me like all of these edges on my joint, are roughly the same size. So I'm just going to set those to equal. They're even. So I'm going to use a center line here to say that these should be symmetric or reflections of one another. That kind of squares everything up. And how wide are those? About 3 millimeters. All right. Here we go. Alright, I should be able to get some measurements here too. So from the top down, that's about 5 millimeters. So I'm going to make actually we'll go from a more solid point here. This is actually closer to like 2.5 because from here to here is about 3.25. That actually looks a little off. I'm just trying to get the shape right here. Let's try 3. Okay, that's actually pretty good. So you can see I'm sort of sketching in this biscuit joint kind of thing. Again, not sure if it's a biscuit joint. Let me get out of this. So notice I didn't put this sketch on either of my 2 master sketch planes because it actually needs to be sketched in a different plane. But following the same rule, I'm going to label this master joint sketch, save. And before I do a cut, I'm actually going to create another sketch on that same plane as my joint sketch and convert all of those entities over. So actually, I wonder, I might even be able to just pick the whole sketch and say, yep, convert it. Yeah, that's good. Okay, now because I want to use it to kind of split apart this wooden outer bezel, there are a couple ways I could do that. I think I'm going to actually do it as a surface, and you'll see why in a second here. I'm going to do just a planar surface, I'm sorry, not planar surface, an extruded surface through all in both directions. So it's kind of going to intersect the entire thing. I'm going to say, okay, go ahead and do that. And then, because I need to actually cut this part into 4 sections, I'm going to use a direct editing feature, where's circular pattern, and instead of patterning a feature, I'm going to pattern a body. And in this case, the body I want to pattern is the surface body. How do I want to rotate? I want to rotate around, I wonder if I need to build an axis. An axis, yeah, it doesn't like that. Let me clear that selection. Alright, before I can make the circular pattern, I need to make an axis of revolution. So I'm going to go back into my features, make reference geometry, and instead of a plane, make an axis. I should be able to just pick a line here and say, okay, now I have this blue dotted line axis. Now I should be able to do my circular pattern, either in features or direct editing tab. Again, I'm going to pick a body. I want to pattern this body around that, if it's hard to pick, this axis. And I only need 2 of them. And I want it to be 180 degrees. Nope, not 180, 90 degrees. There we go. Okay. So see how I have these like cutting tools. You can almost think of them as like a big blade that's going to cut this thing apart. All right, now that I have that, I'm going to save. And I'm going to, I think I'm going to do this as a split. So I think that's in direct editing. Where are we? Split. I'm going to use that surface and that surface as my trim tools. And my target bodies that I want these surfaces to split are really just this one. Oops. I got to pick down here. This body. go ahead and cut the bodies. And yep, all 4 of these are the bodies that I want to keep. So I'm going to say OK. Ha! Hold on. Let's edit this. I don't know why it deleted them. Oh, I don't want to consume the cut bodies. There we go. So they should be cut. Let's go into my surface bodies, and I'm just going to hide both of those. Okay, cool. See how it has that joint on the side? And I'm going to open up my solid bodies folder, and it looks like, yeah, I've got 4 brand new bodies based on my original outer piece. And just to make it easy for me to see, I'm going to change their colors to something so I can tell the difference and see what those joints look like. Save. Okay, yeah, you can kind of see that I've got those joints working their way through that part. It's a subtle detail that'll make a difference once we actually render this thing. Okay, that was the big change I wanted to add to the model, and I think we're pretty good. So I think it's just about time to bring this thing into Keyshot. There's one more step that I'd like to make, so I'm going to save this one more time. Minimize this down, and the next thing I'd like to do is, let me go to, I guess, my face cam. So the clock has a face, which is really just a printed piece of paper. I used my phone to take a picture of this, like as straight on as I possibly could, and rather than like rebuild this in Illustrator, I'm going to bring it into Photoshop and make sure it's nice and round, and we're going to actually use the photo as a label in Keyshot to apply exactly this graphic to our rendering. Alright, so let's open up Photoshop. And it really doesn't matter the size of the image in millimeters, as long as I have enough pixels, high quality image, and it's perfectly round, it should map just fine. So I'm going to create a new file. It really doesn't matter how big is this thing. Might as well try and make it about the right size. So it's about 107 times 2, so 200, 214, 215 maybe millimeters, 215 millimeters by 215 millimeters. Yeah, high resolution is fine. We'll probably go with RGB color. Okay, let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to import or place, that's fine. Place an image. I'm going to go find that image really quick. I saved it in the same folder. Here it is. And you can see literally it's just me holding this clock image. Okay, that's fine. So first things first, I'm going to trim away the background of this thing. So there are a couple ways that I could do this. I'm going to try using this little magic wand quick selection tool. Use a slightly bigger selection size, and then it might be easier to pick everything except the clock. How about that? Okay, so I got most of it. I'm going to zoom in and try to take away. Let's deselect and try this again. I want all of the gold. But none of the background. Alright, this is being a little bit finicky, so let's actually try something else. Before I trim this out, let's try something else. I'm going to create a shape, a circle, that is exactly circle. And I'm going to make it like exactly the size of my canvas. This is exactly the size that I need it to be in my image. We know it's a perfect circle. It's hitting all of these edges exactly. I think I want it to be no color here. Why am I getting an error here? Yeah, it's that size. No interior color. I want like an obnoxious exterior color so I can tell where my image should go. Notice it made it on a separate layer. Okay, now on this layer, I'm going to use my transform controls to scale this clock to be exactly the right size to fit this circle. And it might take a little bit of like push and pull to get it to be exactly right. That's okay. And fortunately I have like a nice buffer zone with that gold outline. I can kind of overstretch it just a little bit. Come on. That's pretty good. Alright, let me zoom in and see. Actually pretty close. Should like scroll up and down here. Looks like I need to make it just a little bit taller. There we go. Yeah, I think that's going to work. Okay, so I've scaled my image so it sort of fits inside that guide circle. Now I'm going to actually, if I hold down Control and then click on the layer that I used to make my ellipse, it'll make a selection based on that ellipse. And if I Shift Control I, it'll invert that selection. Actually, I'm going to forget that. Just make your selection, and then while your mouse is on your clock face image, you can Control J, I believe, to, let me turn off this. It'll basically cut out all the pixels from that layer and put them on a new layer, which is what I want, because all I want is the clock face. Another thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to create another little ellipse for the inside, this little circle down here. Oops. And I'm going to use it to like cut out the inside. Of my clock and kind of bump it around so it's right in the middle. That's fine. I'm going to hold Control and click over here on like the pixel preview to make a selection. Go back to my layer. Let me turn these off. My layer that's already kind of trimmed out. And I believe I can just hit delete. Yep, to delete those pixels on the inside. And I can Control D to deselect. So there I have like a perfectly scaled clock graphic. If I turn off the background, you'll notice that I have transparency everywhere else. So what I'm going to do is save this really quick as clock face trim. It can be a Photoshop file for now, and I'm also going to save a copy of this as a PNG file format, which is something that Keyshot likes, and it keeps the transparency. So clock face trim, that's fine. We'll just save it. Okay. I'm going to, okay, just saved it. I'm going to open it up really quick and just make sure it looks, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, now we're pretty close. I think we're going to bring this stuff into Keyshot. Okay, so Now, I'm using Keyshot remotely. For those of you who are OSU students and have the same thing set up, well, you have to VPN into the system, and have to use this whole push system to approve my connection to the OSU servers. Looks like it's going through. Why do I need to do that? It's because Keyshot actually looks for a license on our OSU servers. Looks like it came through. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to actually turn off. If your Keyshot opens and you don't see the animation bar, that's fine for now. We're going to start by importing the model. Let me go find that model. Okay, there's my clock. I'm going to open that. All of this stuff, separate materials by part, group by object. All of this stuff is probably fine for now. We're just going to import it and see how it looks. Huh. Oh, and I've got those surfaces still in there. So if I wanted, I could actually go back into SolidWorks and delete those surfaces, or I can actually like right-click. Well, I can just hide them, or I can actually delete them in my Keyshot part. Ooh, and I just noticed something. Let me undo my delete. I noticed that my second hand is poking through the glass, so I'm going to go back into my part really quick in SolidWorks and fix that. That would look weird in our rendering. And actually in Keyshot, I'm going to pause the real-time rendering because it takes a lot of juice from the graphics card, or no, from the CPU. Okay. So, fortunately, I'm using a master sketch, and there are a couple ways I can do this adjustment. I might just reduce this down, which should move my hand in, and if I save this, and actually I'm going to go ahead and right-click to delete these two surface bodies as well, because I don't need them in my Keyshot part. Okay. Save that part. We'll go back to Keyshot, unpause, and I think, let's see if this works. I should be able to like re-import that same part and say update geometry. Yeah, there we go. And you'll notice it just updated the existing part. Looks like it's still poking through a little bit. So I'm going to go back into SolidWorks, do the same thing again in my master sketch. These were estimates when I originally did them. Let's see. I might actually go into that sketch, look at it, kind of move some of this stuff around a little bit more. Looks like we were close. Just like changing some of the offsets of this stuff. And because we have it set up as a master sketch, all of these movements that I'm making in my one master sketch should update my real geometry and all of the sketches I used, like converting them from the master sketch. So I'm going to save the part, go back to Keyshot, import the same model again, make sure instead of add to scene, I'm updating geometry. Okay, now I don't see that clock hand poking through like it was before. So I'm going to save my Keyshot file. Clock creation. Okay, I think we're off to a pretty good start. Now, the first part of this Keyshot demo, I'm not going to explain too much. A lot of you guys are already familiar with the basics of dragging materials over in here. And we'll do lighting and all that good stuff too. So we'll start with a really like a basic, you know what, we don't have to do the environment yet. We'll do some basic material application stuff. We'll start with wood because that's always fun. I'm going to use procedural wood so I can get the grain looking proper on all four of these parts. And I am going to want to change the orientation of the grain on two of these. Mapping tool, where is the angle? Alright, so I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Okay. So now the grain is going a different direction on both of these. I'm going to do the same on this grain. Use my mapping tool, rotate the grain 90 degrees. Okay. Yeah, that looks about right. And I might actually rotate these grains just a little bit out so I get that like knot. It's not a knot, but the grain looking more close to how it looks in the actual part here. Procedural wood grain is really neat because it actually takes into account the natural way that wood grain looks like inside a block of wood. And applies it to your geometry as if you had actually machined this thing out of a block of wood. It's really kind of cool. Okay, and if we look closely at those joint areas, you should be able to see the wood grain changing. I'll wait for it to res up a little bit. It actually doesn't look like it. I wonder if I need to like unlink this material. Doesn't seem like the grain is actually changing the way I want it to. So you know what? You might try something else. You might try the traditional wood mapping. Here, we'll pick this light oak that is very similar to what we have on this actual clock. We'll try the same thing. I'm going to try to map this a little bit differently. So actually, I don't want to change that one. I want to change this one. Yeah, that actually did what I was expecting it to do. I might have to look into the procedural wood a little more closely for my next demo. But now, if you look at that joint area, you can see how these grains intersect one another in a way that's actually very close to how it looks in the camera here. So, okay, I'm happy with that for now. It does look a little shiny. The wood that I have here is not quite as shiny, and that's something I can mess with. I'm not going to mess with that just yet. It has to do with specularity. Let's add the glass. I like color density glass. If you notice you can't see through the glass, there are probably a couple little tweaks you can make in lighting, like make sure global illumination is turned on, you have at least one direct bounce turned on, so you can actually see through glass. Alright. Seems like it's taking a while to res up. For now, if it makes it a little bit faster to render, we can use just like a more basic glass material. We can always change that later. Alright, let's see. There are a couple other materials I want to add. We've got this like brass material, shiny brass material for my bezel here. That's interesting. I wonder why those are. Let's see. If I pick this. Oh, that should not be. Oh, I noticed when I dragged my brass to this ring, it also thought it was a part of this top here. So I'm going to unlink the material here on this ring and see if that didn't do the trick. Yeah, I think it did. Okay, now we have a brass ring. Good. There are a couple other things. This piece is actually like particle board. I don't know if that's an option here under wood. Like traditional particle board. No, probably not. So because it's going to be not really a part of the rendering, I'm just going to use nice matte, kind of like stock material for now. Alright, so I'm going to hide the glass material on the front, save, and start applying materials to some of these hands. Let's see, we'll go to basic brass again for the second hand. The hour and minute hands they look painted to me actually, and they're like a painted black color, so I'm going to go find paint. Glossy black paint. Oh, and it looks like those materials are linked also, so I'm going to right click here, unlink the materials for some of these parts. If you notice you're dragging and dropping materials and it's changing more than the material, more than just the material on the part you want, just unlink those parts. It tends to do the trick. Okay, so I've got my hands all done. There's also a little brass. Okay, and those seem to be linked too, so I'm going to unlink the material for that little piece of hardware so I can change its material independently. Yeah, that's not the one I wanted to do. This material, I think I'm going to make something a little bit easier. I'll do like a matte white paint for now so I can kind of see where these other parts are. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one I want to be kind of like a rough brass color. That's good. Okay. I have a like plastic, kind of like a cloudy plastic. No. Hard plastic piece here. Okay, so again, this is just materials. You can spend a lot of time applying materials for the sake of making this demo not take forever. I might be pretty close to done with this for now. What is that part? Where is that? Okay, that's fine. The important part that I want to do is the clock face. So I'm going to pick my clock face part, double click it, and we're going to actually add a label. And I'm going to go find that photo that we kind of worked out based on the original clock face. Let's see. So I'm going to change the depth. Let's see if we can make it show up. And let's see. I want it to go, yeah, on this face. Okay, and I might have to do some like rotating and stuff eventually. Maybe I'll try and put it like in the middle here. I'll say OK, and then we're going to scale it up, and then shift it. No, not what that way. Let's shift it up. Maybe like 35. That's getting pretty close. Because my the circle is in the middle here. It looks like I need to change the angle of this a little bit. See what like -5 does. Well, we know our second hands are at 0. Actually, that looks pretty darn good. Now I can zoom in, and it looks like I might be able to bring this down just a little bit. Yeah, not even that far. Oh, okay. I'm going to increase the scale just a little bit too, like 2.1. Nope, that was too big. 2.05. 2.025. Okay, perfect. It looks a little off center. Like, okay, that's actually pretty close. So I'm going to save. What piece is that? Oh, okay, rough plastic. Where's the actual part? It's actually kind of like yellowy. It's kind of a weird shape. Or a weird color. So it's kind of a weird, like soft. See, soft plastic renders so slowly though, so I'm going to use a hard plastic, a hard rough plastic. That is what it is. It's a little shinier. It's a little bit kind of like gross yellow, like old yellow looking plastic. It's actually pretty close. I'm going to save. Alright. Another thing I might do really quick is I'm going to get this clock up off the ground a little bit. I'm actually going to kind of rotate it so it's looking up just a little bit. Save. Alright, we're doing alright. Let me turn the glass back on. That makes a bigger difference. I am going to go back to glass and use, right now we're using a refractive, like shiny glass. That's fine. We'll leave it there for now. And let's start looking at our lighting. I might just do one from scratch. So I'm going to find like a basic like white studio background to start. That might even be a little bit much. So with like a basic studio background, and then I'm going to go into my HDRI editor and start picking some lights. So I'm going to add some lights here. Add a pin. This is a nice bright light. I want it to give, I want like a nice highlight. There are a couple ways that you can add a pin actually. Let me undo this really quick. I can set a highlight like right here. Did it do it? No. Let's try this again. I'm going to add a pin. Oh, that's where it is. They changed where some of this stuff is. I'm going to add a highlight. Yeah, like on the top of the glass here. And say done. If I go back into the HDRI editor, there it is. I might actually make this thing like significantly larger. See how that looks. I might make the fall off, or how soft it is, make it a little bit softer light. Okay. I think I'm probably going to increase the brightness. So you get those nice like cast shadows behind the clock hands. It's kind of cool. Okay, I'm also going to I'm going to add another light behind the thing. Where is behind it? And I'm going to make it rectangular. I'm going to make it like big, and I'm actually going to change the color of this one a little bit too. Where is my color? We're going to do like a cool light in the background. Okay. There we go. I kind of want to get that like highlight on the top back edge of this wood here. There we go. And you know what? I might add one other light down here. And I'm going to set it as a highlight like down on this side. Oops. Just want a little bit of light down here, like reflected off the floor, kind of. Anyway, we can spend a lot of time on this stuff, and I don't want to get into lighting theory so much here just yet. So we can get a harder shadow on it. Yeah, that's kind of a nice highlight. But you can spend a lot of time on this. Basically what I'm trying to do here, I'm going to save a copy of this as like custom will build a 3. I am going to change, show that instead of the background being lighting environment, I want it to show a color. And I want that color to be like kind of a medium gray. Why is it not showing that? That's kind of weird. Just save. Oh, it looks like maybe it froze a little bit. That's why it's not updating. So I'm going to pause that. Yeah, I wanted to show a color. unpause. There we go. So now it's just showing like a gray background as opposed to showing the lighting environment. If I look at the front of this clock, I'm still getting some nice highlights. Anyway, with lighting, I'm trying to emphasize changing geometry. So in this case, I get like a nice highlight on the top edge of this brass ring. Also a little bit of a highlight on the inside lower edge. I'm really getting a nice hard highlight on the glass here. I'm getting some nice cast shadows from the hands. So that's all pretty good. All right, so that's most of our setup. Now we can finally get into some animation stuff. And let me just check the time. We're already at 50 minutes. So I'm going to go over just some basics of animation here. Once you have your scene set up, animation is similar to rendering in that Keyshot is going to actually just combine a whole bunch of individual frames to simulate an animation motion in this clock. For my, first animation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline, the format that Keyshot uses to do animation, and I'm going to do a simple animation showing these hands moving on the clock. Alright, there are several ways that you can do this. So I'm going to open up this animation tab here. Actually, in my camera, in my image, I'm going to kind of lock my aspect ratio too, just to make it easier. Let's do something that's like a normal screen resolution, like 1280 by 720 is fine, and that way, even as I move this around so I can see more of the timeline, this aspect ratio doesn't change. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to go, so I'm in my animation tab. First thing I want to animate, I think, are these hands moving. So I'm going to hide this, let me save again. I'm going to hide the glass piece. And the first thing I want to do is, let's say, animate this clock hand, my second hand. So there are a couple ways I can do that. I'm going to start by clicking the part and using this animation wizard button down here, and I want to make this part rotate. Okay. There are these helpful little previews of all of these different ways that you can make a part move around. In this case, rotation is what I'm looking for. You might have to pick the part again. You can either find it in this feature tree, or you can pick it in the viewport. And you'll notice that in this space called the timeline down here, it's inserted a brand new animation line. And if I click and drag along this timeline on the top here, from 0 second to 1 second, I'll see a preview of what that part is going to look like in the animation. And it actually doesn't look correct to me. So there are a couple ways you can modify that. You can change the axis of rotation. No, that's not right, until you find something that's close. Okay, that's at least in roughly the right direction. And then we're going to want to set a pivot point for this too. I want it to rotate around the middle of my clock. So let's try picking a pivot point based on an object that has an axis. All right, let's try this and change the axis. We're looking for one that has a center point in the middle. Oh, there we go, of my clock, and that's why I picked my round metallic bezel as the reference. All right, so see how this thing is now starting to rotate around in a way that a clock would actually rotate. Okay, so for this animation, I want this thing to tick like a clock. And rather than rotating 360 degrees all the way around, I want to have the second hand move around in short bursts, 1 second bursts. So there are 60 seconds in a full revolution. So if I divide 360 by 60, that should give me how many degrees this thing needs to rotate to make 1 second. And I think that's 6 degrees. So let's take a look at that. And actually, I'm just going to say finish for now, so I can save. And I'm going to just hit play on this. Okay, so you'll see a really grainy preview of my second hand moving very slowly from its 12 o'clock position to 1 second after 12 o'clock. So I got to change some stuff about this. Second hands don't really move that slowly. I'm going to change the duration of this animation by dragging the duration bar in my timeline. And let's preview that instead. Okay, now I can kind of see it waits and then moves quickly from 12 to 1. Okay, that's actually pretty close. If I wanted it to go faster, I could reduce the time, or you can even see how many frames it takes that second hand to move. And actually for this part, now if you've looked closely at a clock before, especially one of these big clocks, the second hands rarely move and stick exactly to the next second. Sometimes they actually kind of overshoot and correct because they're these big sloppy cheap mechanisms. So I'm going to actually tweak this a little bit, and instead of having my part move exactly the amount of degrees it needs for 1 second, I'm going to adjust this a little bit. So if I click on my part here, like this animation, there's another window that I can change, I guess, attributes of the animation in. And I'm going to actually have this rotate a little bit too far, and then I'm going to create another animation where it snaps back to the correct position. So there are a couple ways I could do that. I could go back in, pick this part, start a brand new animation wizard, and go through all those steps we already went through, or I can right-click an existing animation and duplicate it. And in this new animation, I can say go back 2 degrees, and then if I move this animation after the first animation, and I wonder if I can zoom in here so we can see this happen, and hit play. All right, you know what? I'm actually going to put both of these together. So shift click, add them to a folder, and call it second tick. And now if I right click that folder, I can duplicate the whole folder and move it to another second. So let's see. All right, I might need a couple more to make this easier to see. I'm just going to duplicate a bunch of these. And each time it's creating a brand new animation of an existing part based on an existing animation I already created. Okay, now it looks like it's ticking the way I want it to. So you can mess around with that a bunch. My second hand is finally being animated. Now, another thing that you can do, so you can animate any part this way. And for this first intro project, you're going to animate these hands moving around. You can either do basic second ticking, or if you wanted to sort of speed up time, you could actually increase the rate at which these spin and show these hands hour and minute hands moving much faster. We might go over that a little bit more in class. There's another type of animation, though, I want to talk about really quickly, and it's rather than part animation, let me say, you can actually animate the camera. So I'm going to go over to cameras, and let's just start with a really close-in view here. I'm going to create a brand new camera, and I'll just call this animation 1 camera, for lack of something better. And when I go to Animation Wizard, instead of doing a model or part animation, rotating like we did the second hand, I can use a camera animation. And in this case, maybe I want to actually like zoom the camera. Okay, which camera? That camera I just created. And you'll notice it dropped in another line of animation down here, which I can still move around. And if I drag my timeline, you can see a preview of what that camera is actually doing. So I might actually, instead of having it zoom in, I might actually have this camera like zoom out. So let's see how that looks. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to zoom out from this clock over the course of 5 seconds. And there are some other sophisticated things for those of you who have done animation before. You can actually have the camera motion be linear, meaning it doesn't change how fast it's zooming in. You can have it kind of ease into and ease out of the animation, and these are great little previews of what that means in Keyshot. So I'm going to leave it linear for now. You know what? Screw it. Let's do ease in, ease out. And I'm going to say finish. And let's take a look at what this animation looks like. Okay. So you're seeing pretty quickly that by combining some of these animations together, part animations and camera animations, that you can get a video that, really an animation featuring the object that you've designed. So for the sake of keeping this video short, I'm not going to noodle around with this too much more to find a composition that's really great for this clock. But I will show you how to export an animation. So let me turn the glass on my clock back on. So once you have your animation the way that you want it to be, you can render the animation very similarly to how you can render a basic image in Keyshot. So you go to Render, and instead of Still Image tab under Output, you're going to pick Animation. It by default throws it in a Keyshot Animations folder. That's fine. It also by default encodes it with an AVI encoder, which is the same thing as MPEG-4. That's usually fine too. Now, because we're rendering a whole bunch of frames, this kind of rendering takes a lot longer. I would, under Options, always turn off Global Illumination Cache, and probably for your first animation, I would just go to Maximum Samples and do like a 16 sample animation, or maybe a 32 sample animation, just see what it looks like. Also, really quickly, I'm going to get out of this. In your animation timeline toolbar, make sure that motion blur is on for models and parts, because it will make stuff look way more realistic. We can talk about that more in class. Alright, so we'll go back to render, make sure we're outputting an animation, make sure we know where it's going, make sure we're using maximum samples 32 for this first one. I'm going to go ahead and say render, and you'll see this great little preview of Keyshot rendering your image. And this is going to take some time. So you can see here I've got 126 frames to render, and right now we're only 15% of the way through the first frame. You know what? There's another way that you can preview your animation. So I'm going to get out of this right now. That's fine. There is a little preview button down here in the timeline. That does like a very, very low resolution animation preview, so you can kind of test your settings out before you do a final rendering. That might take several hours to actually render. So anyway, I think I've covered a decent amount of the basics here for this video, and we're already at 1 hour and 4 minutes. So I might just call it And hopefully this is helpful for you guys as you're doing your very first Keyshot animation of a clock. I'd encourage you to think about maybe even storyboarding out the animation of your clock. Like, not only what are you trying to animate, whether it's second hands or minute hands moving, but also how are you framing your shots, and how is the camera moving to highlight special design features that your clock might have. Whether it's maybe starting in close and revealing more of the overall design, or maybe even panning across your clock to highlight certain geometric features. You might even find a cool like rendering or animation reference from the real world, so you don't have to guess on your lighting or even the sequence of camera motions that comprise your animation. For this project, try and do just a 10-second animation highlighting the key features of your clock, and that's kind of where I'd like to see it. So really quick, I'd like to kind of acknowledge that at least the animation portions of this video, I borrowed heavily from a great video of another YouTuber who actually did a clock animation demo. I thought it was really well done, and wanted to expand on it to include modeling a clock and sort of like making your own graphics to basically design a clock from scratch. And in this case, we were designing an existing clock, but with the same steps, you could design your own clock or watch. So anyway, hope this was helpful. We'll see you next time.